All right. This is for assignment 7 in information technology. For assignment 7, we were analyzing the PPP loans that the government gave out for COVID relief. I found this particularly interesting because my company was one of the ones that received some of the PPP funds. And so, for my sake, it was interesting to look at the different amounts and the different variances in the amounts and how crazy those are. Um, we'll jump into the data in just a second, but a couple quick thoughts at the beginning. As we're looking at this, and you're just looking at how many people received these PPP funds, and for me, one of the things that comes up is the ethics around the whole thing and the reporting and the tracking. When we were originally applying for this PPP grant, we knew that there would be forgiveness down the road, because especially for our company, because we didn't get much compared to all of these huge numbers that we're looking at analyzing today. But um, I've already, there's been plenty of stories of people going to jail already for using the funds incorrectly, and how many more of those are going to occur down the line. And one of the things that is going to be interesting that we've talked to our CPA about is how many people are going to be shocked and maddened when they realize that the connection between the economic injury disaster loans, the EIDL loans, and the PPP are very, very threaded together. And if you received both, then you won't have your PPP forgiven in certain instances. So I think there's a lot of people that are going to be upset when this comes about. And we've been keeping good track of it on kind of on our bank. We used Wells Fargo for our PPP loan, and they've just had a terrible time trying to get the forgiveness piece up and running. And so, even though we've had all our paperwork done for months, they haven't been able to get it pushed through. So, just really interesting to see how this is all going to work out. But just to jump into the data here, I do think it's very interesting. This first chart, what I did is a chloropleth map. Um, just to kind of give us a visual right off the bat of what's going on, right? So up in here, the right hand corner, the range is huge, from 6 million to 58 billion. As you can see pretty quickly, California is the 58 billion. And then, it's easy to pick out those bigger states where most of that money is going to go, right? And the loan range for what I did here on this chart is the sum. So this is the sum of the loans given out, PPP loans given out in that particular state. So if you want to go to South Dakota, we just had 1.2 billion, which is still a lot of money. But compared to Texas, California, New York, not that much. 33 billion, 34 billion, 58 billion. Even Florida had 24 billion. So I did some digging and went to a couple of the smaller states. Wyoming didn't even get into the billion. It was just 795 million, right? So really interesting to just scroll around on this map. To me, it just gave me a bigger picture of what was happening for who was receiving these PPP loans and what was going on with the people that were receiving them. So really interesting chart there to me. This next one is the amount of loans by state. So if you take California as an example here, you see that there was 87,900 loans in California that were given out. If you want to take that as opposed to Alaska, 1,700. So it is interesting. Or you look at a state like Guam, 289. Obviously the population differences are to be taken into account there. But I did think it was interesting when you looked at the District of Columbia, and I'll show you some data on a couple slides later. But the District of Columbia only had 28 applications, or 2,800 loans, PPP loans, but they still got a good bit of money. So that is somewhat interesting. Michigan got 20,000, Illinois 27, Florida 42. If you scroll over here a little bit, you can see Texas, which makes sense, and then again New York, which makes sense as well. So, and then if you go down here to South Dakota, we had 1,952 applications or PPP loans in South Dakota, which to me felt kind of small. I know we're not that populated of a state, but still, I know a lot of friends and business owners that did apply. So I was kind of surprised to see 1,900 as such a low number. But The next slide we're looking at here isn't that pretty. It's not really too much to look at, but what I wanted to gather from this was the average PPP loan by state. So if you go to California, see if we can grab that. California, what was the average PPP loan in California? It was 665,000. If you compare that to South Dakota, where the average loan was 654,000. So there were some big numbers, and there's a lot of money given out. Again, uh, back to the ethics of this. I don't know. I paused because it's going to be so hard to track all this money, and for people, a lot of people are going to get in a lot of trouble about it, and there's going to be a lot of issues that come up because we're keeping track of this very closely with the Small Business Administration, and we do some of their weekly seminars. We know that they are building this plane as they're flying it, and it is not going great. And so all of this money out there makes you wonder. So this is just by state, an average amount that was given out per state. So just interesting there. This one was a little more interesting as you look. I didn't include all the states. If you notice up here on the key, I just included Arizona, California, District of Columbia, Florida, Georgia, New York, and Texas. Just wanted to look at a couple of those. So here we're looking at New York by zip code. So you can kind of tell where the higher loan ranges were in those zip codes, which I kind of wanted to filter out some of them because there were too many results if you used all the states. And then I color coded them. So here we're going to start looking at District of Columbia, which is pretty small, but they still got a lot of loans, a lot of money in the District of Columbia there. And then we jump to California or Georgia, I'm sorry. And then here we have Florida. So just interesting to kind of look at zip codes versus, who got the money in that zip code. So if you see this one, it's zip code 32256. And that is for Jacksonville, Florida. So, you can kind of pick out some of these bigger amounts in these states, and then you can kind of guess where they're going to be. So let's look at 32801. 32801, the zip code. And that's going to be Orlando. So, it's pretty easy to tell what's happening here. You can guess that these are probably going to be, the ones we're coming up on right here. That's going to be probably Fort Lauderdale, Miami area right here. So, a lot of different interesting statistics you can gather just from the zip code. And then here we jump to Texas, and again, you can see the same things around the city centers are where these spikes in loans are given out. Now, the most interesting chart that I was able to put together for this one was this chart here. I thought this was pretty fascinating. So it's just 5 of the big banks, right? I think we would all agree that Capital One is a pretty big bank. But in comparison, it's to these 5 others, it's tiny. So Capital One gave out about 946 million in loans, but you go over to JP Morgan and it's 23 billion, almost 24 billion dollars in loans. And so you can just tell out of these big banks, JP Morgan Chase has the lion's share. Bank of America had 18 billion, Wells Fargo had almost a little over 6.5 billion, and then Citibank had almost 3 billion. But I thought this was telling too, right? Because if you think about what's going to happen, like I said, when all this stuff starts trickling down, some of these banks are going to be the beneficiaries of unfortunate decisions that were made by business owners to take the money or do the wrong things with the money and not get forgiveness. So it's going to be hard to forgive a lot of this money that for these bigger amounts. It's going to be harder to track it too. So I thought this chart was just really, really interesting and wanted to share this one with you guys because I was, again, being a part of this PPP loan myself. It's been really neat to watch these statistics and kind of match those up against what I've seen happen. So, so that's what I have for the first part of assignment number 7. We will do the second part a little bit later.